Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joyofbaking.com. Today we're going to make Tweedie Squares, also known as Tweed Squares. Kind of an interesting name, don't you think? But this is what they look like. This is a 3-layer bar. On the bottom we have a white cake batter with flecks of chocolate in it. Then we have a buttercream frosting and then melted chocolate on top. Really, really good. So the first thing we need to do is to preheat our oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius. And you will need a 9-inch square pan, 23 centimeter. And then you can either butter your pan, or I'm just going to use a spray, one of these nonstick sprays. Either way. And then we're going to make the bottom layer first, which is a white cake batter. If you have an electric stand mixer like I have, use your paddle attachment, or you could use a hand mixer for this. The first ingredient you need is a half a cup, 113 grams of butter. Have it at room temperature. I like to use unsalted. I like the flavor of unsalted. And I'm just going to beat the butter just for, maybe 30 seconds, just until it's nice and smooth. Okay. Good part of beating your butter like this, if for some reason it was still a little cold, then beating it by itself like this will soften it. So now I'm going to add 2/3 of a cup, which is 135 grams of granulated white sugar. And I am going to add my vanilla now too. 1 teaspoon, 4 grams of pure vanilla extract, because then that, I'm going to now beat my butter and my sugar and my vanilla for, maybe 2-3 minutes on medium-high speed, just until it's light and fluffy. Okay. So this is what we're looking for. Just really nice and light and fluffy. And that helps to give us that nice light and fluffy cake. So now what we're going to do is add 2 large eggs. Have your eggs at room temperature because they will beat in easier if they're at room temperature. And I like to do it one at a time, beat one in and then the second one. That looks good. Scrape it down one more time. Okay, so now for our dry ingredients, I have in a small bowl here 1 1/3 cups, which is 175 grams of all-purpose flour. You may know that as a plain flour. And then 1 1/2 teaspoons, which is 6 grams of baking powder, help to give a little rise to our cake, and 1/2 teaspoon, 2 grams of salt. I like to use kosher salt. I find it's not as strong tasting, but you could use a table salt. And if you used salted butter, then I would just leave out that salt. So just whisk that together, or you could sift it. And you will also need 1/2 cup, which is 120 grams of milk, and have your milk at room temperature. Of course, if you use a whole or a full fat milk, you will get a richer tasting cake than, say, if you use a reduced fat. I wouldn't use a non-fat here. So what I'm going to do is add about 1/3 of the flour mixture, and then I'm going to alternate with about 1/2 of my milk, and then back and forth. And I do that because if I just put all my flour in, I would really have to beat this a long time. So if you do it kind of alternating, you don't have to beat as much. So your batter won't be as tough. And then if you did that, then your cake would be tough, which we don't want. So, okay, and do this on low speed. You don't want that flour coming up in your face. And I'll add about 1/2 of my milk. stop my mixer. Put a little more of the flour. The rest of my milk. Scrape down here, and then I'm going to add the rest of my flour and then just beat until it's all combined. So not too long. There we go. Okay, that's good. Let's give it a quick stir, make sure everything's all mixed together. And then you will need 2 ounces, 60 grams of grated semi-sweet chocolate. And, you know, when you're deciding on what kind of chocolate you want to use, always think when you're baking with chocolate, if you wouldn't eat it just on its own, then don't bake with it, because, you know, with the semi-sweet, you want one that you kind of like. And then when I grated, I actually used a box grater. This is probably the hardest part of the recipe, is grating the chocolate. It takes a little while, and this is what you want, just small flecks. And that is what, you know, is going to give us, I guess that's why these squares are Tweedie or Tweed squares, because when you fold in the grated chocolate, it kind of looks like a tweed. So, I guess that's where the name came from. I don't know. This is my mom's recipe. She started making it when I was a kid, so and I don't know where she got the recipe. But it is a good one. So just fold it in. Big strokes. I think it looks so cool. Okay, it looks good. So now we're just going to always make sure you scrape down to the bottom of your bowl. Just pour it in here. These squares freeze really well, so my mom always made them for Christmas, during the Christmas season, and she always froze them, you know, so you can make them ahead of time. And then you can just take a back of a spoon, or I'm using an offset spatula, and just spread it out. So we're going to bake these for, you know, about 20 minutes. Now, everybody's oven is a little different, and you don't want to over bake your cake, so I would, you know, test it maybe at about 17, 18 minutes just to see if it's done. And it's done when a toothpick inserted into the center comes out clean. And also you will notice that the sides, the cake around the sides will just be starting to pull away. That's another sign. And then when you touch the top, it you know, it kind of springs back. So, okay, so about 20 minutes. Okay, so our cake is now done. See, it's firm to the touch. As you can see, it's starting to pull away from the sides of the pan, and a toothpick inserted into the center comes out clean. So now what we want to do, put your pan on a wire rack, and we want to let it cool completely, and then when we come back, we will do our buttercream frosting. So our cake has cooled, so we can start our buttercream frosting. I'm going to use my stand mixer again with the paddle attachment. Again, you could use a hand mixer, or you could just beat it with a wooden spoon in a large bowl. So the first thing you will need is 1/3 cup, which is 75 grams of butter. Again, have your butter at room temperature. salted or unsalted, whatever your preference. And I'm just going to beat this just until it's nice and smooth. Okay, and then I am going to add half a teaspoon, 2 grams of pure vanilla extract for some flavoring. And what you will need is 1.5 cups, which is 175 grams of powdered sugar. You may know that as confectioner's sugar, icing sugar. And I did sift. I just used like a strainer. You could use an actual sifter to get out. There's usually lumps in powdered sugar. I'm just going to dump that in there. And then you will need 2 tablespoons, which is 20 grams of a dried custard powder. Usually comes in this. It's for flavoring. It's a mixture of sugar and cornstarch, or you may know it as corn flour, and some flavoring. And I think it really adds a nice flavor to our frosting. If you've made the Nanaimo bars on the Joy Baking website, this frosting is very similar to that. So you can buy this in a lot of grocery stores. You can specialty food stores, or you can just do it like I do, and I just order it on Amazon. So, and if you cannot find it or you don't want to use it, you could just use 2 tablespoons of an instant vanilla pudding powder. And now we're just going to beat this slowly. Don't want to come up in our face until everything's all mixed together. And you will need some either milk or light cream. But first I want to see the consistency of these ingredients, and then we'll probably need to add some milk. Okay. You can see this is really thick. So obviously we wanted a spreading consistency, so we will need to add some milk. So you normally like maybe a couple tablespoons, but I like to start like maybe with 1. Beat that in and then we'll check it. Okay, and it's pretty good, but I think I'm just going to add a little, just a touch more. When you spread it, you want it to go nicely, easily, not too thick. Oh, maybe. See? Okay. I'm just going to add just a little more. And then we should be good to go. Yes. Of course, if you ended up putting too much milk, you could always put a little more powdered sugar. You want to try not to do that because then you go back and forth trying to get that right consistency. So this is what I like. So now we're just going to, isn't that a beautiful color? It's kind of like a peach, pale peach color. It's kind of why I like to use, also why I like to use the custard powder, because it does add a really nice color to our squares. Okay. Then I've got an offset spatula. You could use the back of a spoon. We just want to spread that into a nice layer, even as you can get it. And then what we're going to do is just put this into the refrigerator. We want to get the frosting firmed up a little because we are going to be spreading on some melted chocolate. So spread this and put it into the fridge. You know, it might be like a half hour to get it nice and firm. Of course, you could leave it longer, but it usually takes about that. And then when we come back, we will do our final chocolate layer. So now we are ready for our final layer, the chocolate layer. And so you will need a saucepan of simmering water. And then in a heat-proof bowl, I like to use stainless steel, you will need 4 ounces, which is about 120 grams of, you can use either a semi-sweet or a bittersweet chocolate. Again, use a chocolate that you would just like to eat just on its own. And I've got these round discs, I guess you could call them. Or if you're buying like a chocolate bar, just roughly chop it up. And then just put that over simmering heat. And then I'm going to add 1 tablespoon, it's about 13 grams. I'm using shortening. You could use butter. And I add that with the chocolate. I find it then, it just makes your chocolate, once we put it on our squares, slide, you know, spread a little easier. So either use a shortening or a butter. And I'm just going to melt the 2 of them together. Okay, so our chocolate is melted. So just remove it from the heat, give it a good stir, and it's a little too warm. I want it kind of just lukewarm. So I'm just going to let this cool down just for a few minutes, and when we come back, we will spread it on top of our squares. Okay, so now we're ready. This is chilled, and we got our chocolate. So I'm just going to drizzle it over the top. Don't want to waste any, like good chocolate. And then again, offset spatula, back of a spoon. I'm just going to spread this out into a thin layer, and then I'm going to put it back into the fridge just to firm up that chocolate a bit. And then when we come back, we will cut one. So now we're ready to cut our squares. Chocolate's firmed up, sharp knife. Sometimes I like to have a glass of hot water, and then I usually take the knife and just cut the edges, because sometimes, which I didn't, the chocolate doesn't go right to the end. And then I'm going to have like a paper towel and wipe. So if you find, if you find your, like when we put our knife in, if your chocolate cracks, maybe you should wait a few minutes. It's too cold, or just dip it in your hot water and wipe off your knife. So cut down, and then you want to wipe your knife off each time. You can put it in your water, and then again I like to cut this edge off there, and then cut your squares. These are quite rich, so, you know, as big or as small as you want. Let's see if I can get that first one. Although I kind of look at it, if the first one doesn't come out, then it's mine. Kind of the cook's treat. We should be able to have that. What? Yeah. Well, no, it didn't come out clean. Well, try it anyway. Very good. Okay, I'll try one more so I can show you. See if I can get this one out. Nice clean. It's a better cut. Take that off. As you can see, you've got that tweed kind of pattern cake on the bottom, and then you have beautiful buttercream chocolate on top. It's a pretty square. It really is. But I'm going to eat this one since it's kind of. It's a really nice tasting. With the cake, kind of like a mild flavored chocolate cake, and then of course that creamy, smooth, rich buttercream frosting with the chocolate on top. Really nice square. Like I said, you can store them in the refrigerator for like probably 4 or 5 days, or you can freeze them. Either way, try them. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joyofbaking.com.